If you're thinking of starting a podcast, you should check out Anchor. Anchor is a free and easy to use tool to create a podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listeners. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm to get started. Hello and welcome to the LGBTQ STEMcast, a podcast where we interview LGBTQ scientists from different STEM fields in order to create a more diverse and welcoming community. In today's episode, we will be chatting with Dr. Ajay Major, an internal medicine doctor and oncology fellow. Join us as we discuss the LGBTQ community, business, and medicine. So how are you doing, AJ?
I'm doing well.
That's good to hear. How's quarantine been treating you?
It's been busy. I've been working a ton. I just finished my first year of fellowship, where is our clinically heavy year. So I spent plenty of time in the hospital. A lot of telemedicine, which has been hard to get used to a little bit as well.
I can imagine it's been a change for all of us and your field specifically because, medicine is a constantly changing field. And I think right now it's changing more than ever in a rapid pace. So can you tell us a little bit about your work and yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I am currently a second year adult hematology and oncology fellow at the University of Chicago, which is 2 years out of a 3-year program, which means I also just finished last year my residency in internal medicine, which I did at University of Colorado. And my work right now is mostly centered around better understanding the toxicities, so that's side effects, but not only side effects, also financial toxicities, so that's the cost of care and especially the burden of healthcare costs on patients themselves, around treatments that we use to treat different blood cancers.
That's very interesting. And how did you end up in that current topic? What made you choose that specific
It's
topic?
a good question. So my research is all kind of what we call outcomes research. So it's studying the outcomes of interventions that we do to patients. And my interest in it actually really grew out of wanting to study. So the issue we have in a lot of blood cancers, specifically lymphomas and myelomas, in lymphomas, we have the ability to cure a fair number of patients of their cancers. But then, people have a number of side effects that interfere with their quality of life that can persist for 5, 10, 15 years after they've been treated. And so better understanding why people get those side effects long term, fatigue, sometimes fatigue that's so bad that they have difficulty working, but also, chronic pain, insomnia, difficulty with social life, of course, finances are another huge component. So better understanding why those happen and what we can do about those, in the short term when we treat patients for their lymphoma, and also long term. When it comes to myeloma, which is more of like a chronic cancer that requires many, many different types of treatments over time, many of those treatments come with a lot of bad toxicities and side effects. And so the treatments might work great to help treat their myeloma, but they may suffer a number of bad side effects or toxicities from those treatments. So better understanding what causes those side effects, how can we better manage those side effects, and how can we design better treatments in the future that have less side effects in general. So the quality of life component is really what brought me into that field. And I've become progressively more and more interested also in what we call survivorship, which is once you start getting treated for a cancer, your journey with that cancer, your survivorship, whether you have to be on a treatment for the rest of your life, whether you get cured and you have side effects long term, better understanding how we manage those patients and their issues with survivorship.
Wow, that's amazing. And I can imagine you also feel a level of fulfillment when you kind of help a patient in that sort of way, understanding as well how it can affect them and a better way to help them. I can imagine that gives you a big fulfillment to
Well, and
yourself.
and that's absolutely right. I mean, because obviously it's fulfilling to say, "Hey, we've cured you of your cancer," but for me, it becomes even more fulfilling saying, "We've cured you of your cancer, and this is how we're going to manage, the side effects from what's happening to you long term, or we're treating your cancer, and this is how we can help you feel better as you're being treated." So that to me, both those components are very fulfilling, and I think they're very intermeshed. It's just that the long term issues we as a field have not dedicated as much time or energy into, and that's what brings me to it. That's what attracts me to that area of study.
Wow, that's amazing. And after seeing your profile, I see that you also run some businesses. Can you tell me a little
Yeah,
bit
so
about
that's
that?
that's a long story, but yeah, I'll try to keep it short for you. So my background in undergrad was actually in I studied chemistry, I studied Spanish, and I was editor in chief of our college paper. So I actually have a kind of some on the ground training in journalism. Running a 50-member editorial board newspaper for a college campus. And so when I started medical school, I wanted to continue using journalism in some way within medicine. And so me and one of my colleagues founded this online, at that time we called it an online magazine for medical students, which is called In Training, in-training.org, which was meant to be kind of an online platform for medical students to write and experiment with writing for a larger audience on a platform that was peer managed. And so I founded that publication back in 2012, and actually it's been continually running since for, gosh, 8 years now. And so, with working on In Training, I also came to found In House, which I'm editor in chief of, which is the online peer reviewed publication for residents and fellows, trainees like me. And as part of creating those publications, my colleague and I decided to found a 501c3 nonprofit corporation called Pager Publications, which provides the administrative and financial support for those two publications. And in the interim, we founded three new publications, and we actually purchased a publication in the United Kingdom, all of which are publications that are for trainees in public health, medicine, and in part of that, creating that kind of publishing house, we've also published 4 print books too. So we've kind of created this small conglomerate of publications that are really meant to serve as training grounds for people who are doing novel and interesting things. My secret goal is to bring together some of the best and brightest thought leaders in medicine to really talk about what has to change in the future, and doing it in a way that's kind of peer managed. One thing you'll find in a lot of academia is that for trainees, or for people who are early in their training in academics, especially in medicine, there aren't a lot of big platforms for us to write and communicate. So that's what these platforms are meant to serve as, is a kind of lower barrier to entry place for people to start writing.
That's an amazing work you're doing, actually. I like how you're specifically focusing in medical trainees as yourself. You said they don't have a big platform, and it usually happens a lot in other academic settings, not just in medicine. I feel like every STEM field has that kind of pressure that they want us to publish, but they don't give us a platform. And it's something that is kind of hard to navigate, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. So, can you tell us about your experiences as an LGBTQ physician? Because maybe I don't know if it has affected you at all, but
It's a great question. I Maybe this is an atypical experience, but throughout all of my medical training, um, I haven't really had a lot of negative experiences surrounding being a queer physician. I've gone through my medical training, but I will tell you though, on one hand, I haven't really had a lot of LGBTQ plus mentors in a lot of my medical training at the institutions I was at, which, it is what it is. Um, but I haven't really kind of had that, had a lot of experiences that have been negative, and if anything, a lot of my experiences have been frankly positive. A good example is me and my husband. We couples matched, which is a whole process you can do for residency. We couples matched together for residency, and we couples matched here at University of Chicago for our fellowships. And all along the way, when we were interviewing at a number of places, but at the places we ended up going, people said, "Oh, great, the two of you are coming here together. That's awesome. What are you both interested in doing for a career?" Or even here at University of Chicago, when we both applied, he applied into the Department of Geriatrics, and I, of course, applied into Hem-Onc. And, I met with our program directors here, and they said, "Oh, that's great, that you're going to be in the same place. How can we best, get you both to fit here?" So very welcoming experience. Although, as I said, I haven't had a lot of, LGBTQ plus mentors myself along all of my training.
that's also good that you had some good experiences because a lot of people don't have that. And it's good to hear about stories about people who do because it's not always just bad situations. A lot of people have good stories to tell and good experiences, even being LGBTQ in science. Do you think having do you think if you had a LGBTQ mentor, would that have changed the way you see yourself or your work in any way?
That's a great question. I think it's hard to say because, the only thing I can kind of speak for is my own journey and my own experience. I think if I had had a LGBTQ mentor in college, or if I had had one in medical school, would that have changed my experience? It may have, quite honestly, or I may have ended up doing the, kind of same path that I'm doing here. So, again, for me, I've had a very fortunate and privileged experience, not having a lot of kind of barriers with respect to my gender or sexuality going through my training. But obviously there are, and this has been empirically demonstrated in the research and also in the lived experiences of a lot of my colleagues, there have been incredible barriers. And so, I think having access to more LGBTQ plus mentors for the community, I think can only serve to make the experience better for those of us who are going through our training, but also I think would serve to just increase the diversity in the field. I think it's pretty intuitive that having more queer folks in medicine or in public health or in any of the STEM fields would increase, the likelihood of other queer folks coming into the field, and would increase diversity in the field overall.
I agree completely. And I think also some of the older people in the fields kind of see being LGBTQ as unprofessional, and that tends to scare us LGBTQ folks away from it. I've heard a lot of stories about people interested in medicine, but ended up dropping it due to their inner fear about being, judged or rejected because of their sexuality or sexual preferences. Do you have anything specifically to say about that? About any advice for undergraduates that might be kind of experiencing that?
I've heard about, I'm pretty active on Twitter, and I've heard the exact same experiences from a number of my queer colleagues saying that they were, that they felt, that, negative stereotyping surrounding kind of anything about the LGBTQ plus experience. As far as my advice for undergrads, I think the most important thing is to, unfortunately, there's a great degree of culture, and this is particularly prevalent in medicine. I mean, medicine is a very conservative, very hierarchical kind of academic structure, and so obviously, yeah, there are a lot of kind of old-timey conservative perspectives about the queer experience throughout medicine. So, unfortunately, entering into that culture, that might be very hierarchical and might be very discriminatory, that can be very challenging. I think the most important thing is to reach out to other people who are in the field and ask them for their advice on any of these numbers of issues. I mean, I think this podcast is a tremendous example of, the need to build communities, safe spaces for queer folks to say, hey, you're doing something that I'm interested in, but I feel these barriers. Let's talk about it. I think, I'm always open to serving as a kind of unofficial mentor or coach when it comes to entering medicine. And I think, obviously that puts a lot of pressure on us as queer folks, but I see that as part of kind of my responsibility being in a STEM field, is to say, hey, for those of you who are struggling, I'm here to help. I've been in your shoes, I can help you walk you through the process. So I think for any undergrads who might be interested, reaching out to other queer folks on Twitter, Facebook, listen, it's never the wrong thing to cold email someone and say, hey, I saw you give a talk, or I read your article, or, I see that you're an out and proud queer person. I'd love to talk with you more about your experience and how you did what you did. I think building that kind of inclusivity within our community is going to be pretty key moving forward.
Yeah, I agree completely with that statement. I also think that it's very important to create your own community, even if you don't have the support that you should have in maybe your academic setting. Building a community outside of it is also very helpful. As you said, as an example, Twitter has a very active community of STEM, and I've found a lot of supporting people there that have helped me. And my ventures, like this podcast, as you said, I don't think I would have started this if I hadn't had that support on Twitter that I did. And I think it's very important to have support, even if it's not direct support from your academic faculty. Maybe you can find it somewhere else. Having a mentor is very important. And I think a lot of queer folks get the idea that everything is going to be bad if they are themselves in a STEM field, and that's always not the case. I've heard a lot of good stories about being LGBTQ and working as a doctor, and those are the people that are going to be able to help the next generation of scientists like yourself. And being in this podcast is a very good example of how we can change everything. The culture the academic has said that's like, oh, you have to fit a stereotypical mold to be a scientist or a doctor,
Right.
which is not the case. There's not a mold for anything in life, any profession. You can be many different things. You can be gay, you can be a doctor, you can be gay, you can be a scientist, you can be gay and a professor. It's something that we as a society need to change, but it's not going to change itself. We need to put in the work for it, and to make sure the future generations have the platform and the confidence to be able to say, yeah, I want to do this and I can do it even if I'm gay or if I'm a lesbian or if I'm queer. I think that's a very important aspect that we as society need to change. um do you think that uh being queer has affected you in a way, particularly as how you portray yourself? As in, do you feel like you need to change who you are when you're at work completely based on if you're thinking constantly, oh, am I being too queer for this? It's going to be seen as unprofessional.
You know, it's a good question because it's something I think I've struggled with a little bit in this kind of idea of code switching. The way that I interact with, my partner or my friends versus how, I interact with faculty or with professionals. And, I think some of that is also intrinsic into medicine, which is why I think it makes it a little bit easier. And what I mean by that is that, when you're with patients, I mean, there's certainly, all of medical training in this day and age, the simulated patients and, medical students practicing on a bit, who are basically actors, and they're practicing communication skills and, the right way to say things, the right way to, the right patient appropriate language to use when you're talking about diseases and tests, et cetera. So I think part of that is intrinsic in medicine. And so, actually my husband jokes with me all the time that, whenever I'm interacting with, people that I don't know or with, faculty with patients, I have a more like straight presenting voice or a more straight presenting persona. I guess it's something that's been hard coded in me over a long time. It's not something I consciously pick up on a lot, but I think there is a degree of that code switching. It's something that I do. I don't think it's the right thing. I don't think that's something that queer folks should be required to do, or B, really should be doing. We should be able to be who we are no matter what profession we do. But I think unfortunately it's something that I have affected onto myself.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also happens in other academic settings as we as queer folks sometimes get told that we really can't say some things or can act certain ways. Especially, I think, when it comes to stereotypes that society has set for men and women. I think it's a lot easier when you're straight passing, because as myself, sometimes a lot of people say I'm straight passing, which is kind of a weird term because there's no such thing as a straight mold, as I said earlier. Um, as I said before, I think having a supportive community is very important. What's something that you would change in the specific way we train our doctors, as in when they see some problems in the LGBT community, they tend to ignore it in a way, as in, let's say, gender identity. They kind of just go by sex in the medical field and some procedures and stuff. How do you think that's the thing we could change?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we as a medical field struggle with all the time. I mean, I'd refer you to Fenway Health, UCSF, WPATH, all these huge international groups that focus specifically on recognizing the clear, I mean, better understanding the clear barriers that LGBTQ plus folk have in medicine, and have kind of proposed ways to you know design interventions that would better enable easy access to care for queer folks. I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the most important things or one of the most important things that we can do as a field within medicine is better training for not only new physicians or new trainees, new medical students. Honestly, we should extend that training all the way to kind of the pre-med, era, right? I mean, pre-med students should be trained on, you know, gender and sex and what the trans experience is like, what the gay experience, what the lesbian experience. I mean, they should be really trained and should be, have multiple opportunities to interface with the research that's going out there, but also as I said, the lived experiences of queer folks. And that training has to continue throughout, right? That training has to continue in medical school and residency and fellowship for faculty, right? From an institutional level. I mean, institutions really should be training folks on how to ask people for their pronouns, what is the appropriate way to refer to people's anatomy? I mean, all of those like basics, that those things can be learned, and the way it's learned is through training. But I think, as you said, kind of the older generation, younger generations are obviously, you know, more, we interface more with the queer community at large, and so we're more used to that kind of language and that nuance. But to be honest, a lot of older folks just never experience that. They never interface with that, so they do need training. They need education on how to refer to people properly, and how to address some of these issues. So I think training throughout the entire spectrum is key.
I agree with that completely. So let's talk a little bit about your business again. I've heard medicine is such a time consuming field. How do you balance having a business and working in medicine?
I think it comes down to teamwork, right? I mean, like the way we structure, and I have a background in business training, and a lot of what we do, a lot of what you learn about business training is kind of like people management, right? And it's partially learned, but also kind of a practical skill, right? So all of our publications that we run are all decentralized, meaning there's no headquarters, there's no specific time meetings. Everything is done virtually over Gmail, over Google Docs, using WordPress, using platforms that, because let's face it, medical students, like you said, are crazy busy. So how do you have, how do you create a system where a medical student has, easy way to submit an article, get edits from an editor, have a managing editor across the country review it? Well, all of that has to happen in a decentralized way. So I would say that building those kind of systems, which is kind of what Page Publications, my company, specializes in, is helping publications build those kind of decentralized virtual systems, but also just getting a phenomenal team. I mean, at the end of the day, nothing I can do with any of my publications or my company would be possible without having team, quite honestly, of all other trainees like me. I mean, in training is all medical students, in house is all residents and fellows. I mean, when you're kind of all in that same experience, it's easy to say, hey, listen, I know you're going to be in the ICU for the next month, really busy. I'm on an easy rotation. I'll take care of the editing duties, or I'll take care of, such and such task, so that, when it comes down to my time where I have to have a busy month, like, you'll be there for me as well. So I think the key component is managing those teams. And that's really how we've been able to do all the work.
And I think that also goes into other fields, specifically team management. As in, you're a doctor, you constantly are managing the medical team. Doctors are seen as the head of the medical team. I think that's also very, interesting that you're able to manage your time as a physician and run your team of your businesses. Do you think has impacted you as a physician, your ability to run both teams, as in a doctor and your business team?
I think a lot of the skills do definitely go hand in hand, because you're absolutely, I mean, nothing in medicine anymore is from a single person, and especially in oncology. I mean, that's part of the reason I went into oncology, is that it's all so team oriented, right? I mean, the care of a patient with cancer involves, everybody: nurses, social workers, physicians, pathologists, radiologists, radiation oncologists, surgical, I mean, you name it. I mean, the whole spectrum of care. And so, yeah, there is, but, the job of the medical oncologist, which is what I'm training in, is we're often the quarterback. We're the ones who kind of are the primary gatekeeper for deciding, which treatment is next, when they see the radiation oncologist, when surgery is indicated. We help, when we need to manage symptoms, when we need to switch treatments. That's a lot of us, is kind of in our wheelhouse and what we're trained to do. And I find a lot of those skills, some of the same skills. I always joke about this with my my co-editor-in-chief of my college paper, who I'm best friends with. We joke all the time that, like, managing this crazy hectic room of writers and editors for college newspapers share a lot of similarities with what we do on the wards or what we do in the clinic every day. So I think a lot of those skills parallel and definitely can be applied.
That's amazing how you're able to manage both things. I struggle with time management on myself. I could not imagine managing a whole team of editors and a whole team of medical professionals. So you're an oncology fellow right now. Did you ever consider any other specialties when you were in training in medical school specifically?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I kind of I've kind of always wanted to, I mean, ever since my first year in medical school, we had such a phenomenal lecturer who taught oncology, who I was just kind of like, I was like, oh, I have to do this the rest of my career. But for a long time, I also thought about becoming a primary care physician, because primary care physicians are like some of the smartest people in medicine, in my opinion, and serve as the backbone of our entire healthcare system. And I mean, you want to talk about team management and managing, complex patients and lots of them. I mean, that's a primary care doctor. I mean, my partner, all the work that he does in geriatrics. I mean, those are complex patients, require, interface of multiple specialists, social worker, how things are going to home, how things are going with family. I mean, a lot of that appeals to me, that kind of like complexity, the organizational complexity of a primary care physician definitely appeals to me. And that was something I considered for a long
Yeah,
time.
and I also think that primary care physicians are kind of always put in the back of people's mind when they come to the top medical professions. A lot of people see surgery in the top and primary care in the bottom when it should you shouldn't even put it in a spectrum like that. They're all equal. We all need all the medical professionals. That's why we have different fields specifically, because there's no such thing
Yeah.
as a top profession for medicine. There's a profession for everybody, even if it's not medicine. And I think that's also very important to address, that everything's important in every field. So,
Yeah, there's a saying we use in medicine. There's a saying we use. It takes all kinds. That's the saying. It's like it takes all kinds of physicians, nurses. What name you to help take care of patients.
yeah, totally. Do you consider the medical field to be very diverse as it is right now? Do you think it can still improve? It can obviously still improve, but how do you think it can improve?
I mean, I think the field of medicine always serves to benefit. Well, not just medicine, all of STEM serves to benefit from more diversity of all kinds. Just because, again, we bring our life experiences into what we study, and academia unfortunately gets. I mean, rightfully so, often gets branded as kind of the ivory tower, right? The ivory tower of medicine. And I think just bringing in more diverse thoughts and perspectives, and really understanding how the world works outside of the four walls of this hospital or the four walls of your research building, is critical to understand the work that we do. Because ultimately, a lot of us in STEM do our research, do our work because we want to affect the world at large. And unless you get immersed in that world and the real world and those experiences, I think, you're not really getting what the work is for. So I think that diversity is key.
And do you think academic medicine has an inherently kind of sexist, homophobic, transphobic kind of like idea in the older generations, which are kind of the ones that are running the programs? Do you think that's true?
I think historically, yes. I think there's a lot of, I mean, I would say there's a lot of like implicit bias. I mean, there's plenty of studies that show that physicians have a ton of implicit biases. And so, yeah, historically, absolutely. I mean, all of the major organizations have long histories of, racist tendencies, transphobic, I mean, you name it, right? And so, that history ultimately, obviously set precedent for a lot of what we do now. I think changing that history, changing that culture is a immense and task that we have. But the only way we can do it is from the ground up, right? I mean, grassroots movements like what you're doing with this podcast. One of the publications we started for in training, it's called Mosaic in Medicine. It's dedicated entirely to underrepresented voices in medicine, right? Like creating platforms, creating spaces for us to be able to affect change, even on a small grassroots level, is what will, move all of us forward and move us to a more inclusive and diverse community. But absolutely, that history unfortunately is there. That's just fact.
Exactly. And I think it's so built into society right now that when you tell a kid to draw a doctor, they're probably going to draw a male, white, cisgender male, which is kind of wrong. And I think that's something, as you said, we need to change ourselves from the ground up, because we really can't shoot just for the head. It's not going to happen from one day to another. It's something that we have to go through as scientists and change ourselves, starting communities, giving unrepresented voices the voice to express their feelings and their emotions. Because a lot of the times the field kind of invalidates their feelings because it's such an objective field, when it's really not. A lot of the medicine is kind of subjective, sorry, at this point, and it's something we need to change, which I completely agree with. Well, that's kind of everything I had for you. Do you have anything else you want to talk to me about?
No, thank you so much for this chat, and congratulations on this podcast. I mean, this is exactly the kind of work we need to do. And I hope, and from what I heard, you'll have plenty of more voices to bring to the table so we can start doing some important work.
And thank you so much for supporting this project. It's great to have people like you in here. That's why I started this. I really want to share the voices of everybody and their respective fields and what they think about this. It was a great chat. Thank you so much for being here. It was nice having you.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the LGBTQ STEMcast. Please follow us on Twitter at LGBTQ STEMcast and feel free to support our Patreon so we can keep continuing to bring you episodes every week. Thank you.